So today, WWE and Peacock dropped the Bray Wyatt documentary, Bray Wyatt Becoming Immortal. And I did watch it. I just got done with it. I'm going to give my thoughts on it here in just a moment. I'm going to give my thoughts on the documentary. Obviously, a really powerful, emotional piece. I mean, we knew it would be. We knew it would be something that was going to hit a lot of people because Bray Wyatt's a guy that many people that's a guy who's a young guy that modern people saw. See, it's one thing if you see a documentary about somebody from many years in the past that maybe we weren't around for his prime. Like when you see documentaries on like guys like Harley Race. I wasn't around in the 70s when Harley Race was like on his way. You know what I mean? He was a champion. Like and Terry Funk. Like I've seen these guys wrestle, right? Obviously, but I wasn't with them. With Bray Wyatt, I think everybody knew Bray Wyatt from this era. The dude was 36 years old when he passed away last year. And, you know, I did a video about Bray Wyatt last year. I talked about it. I talked about him and I spoke in the DMs a few times. He showed me the Fiend character. So obviously I'm going to watch this because, you know, he's somebody who I didn't know personally. I didn't know him personally, like I didn't go to his house or anything like that. We're from the same area though, well, roughly the same area as far as like where we grew up. He's from Brooksville, which is about 45 minutes north of where I grew up, but nevertheless, it's still like relatively close by. So yeah, I'm going to give my thoughts on the documentary. First of all, obviously the editing and everything, you know, Triple H, the executive producer, you know, it's great. I mean, the music, they showed a lot of behind the scenes footage that they had never shown before. Stuff. Well, first of all, the first sort of quarter of it, like the Cody Rhodes documentary, was all about Bray Wyatt and when he was Windham Rotunda, his birth, and then of course Taylor, aka Bo Dallas, you know, Taylor Rotunda. Taylor Rotunda is one of the main voices that carries the early part of this documentary. The parents are there. They interview, obviously, IRS, a.k.a. Mike Rotunda, and his U.S. Express partner, Barry Windham, and how basically Mike Rotunda met Barry Windham's sister, which led to the birth of Bray Wyatt because they got married. So they go over all that stuff. He was a high school wrestler, and then he was trying to play football, but Bo Dallas was trying to get into WWE developmental, and so Bray Wyatt decided to join. They talked a lot about how he loved horror movies. They talked about how his mom used to read Stephen King to him, and that kind of got his mind going. A lot of stuff in this documentary about him being creative, and he certainly was that. He brought different elements from the horror sci-fi genre into professional wrestling. Not the first one, obviously The Undertaker. They brought up, I mean, there's like voiceover from Windham Rotunda himself on here talking about The Undertaker, talking about Papa Shango. He loved sort of like the dark characters of wrestling. And they did discuss his run as Husky Harris and how much he hated it. It was a way up on the main roster, but he didn't like it necessarily. And he talked about, like, the documentary goes into how Triple H, who was starting to run developmental at the time, was like, let me see what we can do. They brought him down into NXT. Well, first it was FCW. And then NXT. And that's where he really began to craft that Bray Wyatt character, you know. And we saw a lot about the behind the scenes. They interviewed his like makeup and costume guy. He was on here a lot. Triple H was on there a lot as well. His peers like Sami Zayn, Seth Rollins were on there. Interestingly enough, I'm going to say this. Interestingly enough, and you know what? Smartly enough, the documentary left out two things that it was actually very smart for them to do this. Probably the two worst things that Bray Wyatt was involved in, and it was not his fault, was the Seth Rollins match at Hell in a Cell 2019 and the Goldberg, when Goldberg beat him at Saudi in February a few months later. I'm so glad they cut that out because that, like, they focused on Bray's creativity. They talked about the Fiend character. Alexa Bliss was interviewed. They really did talk a lot about kind of his creation of that character, and even the other Bray Wyatt character. I didn't realize that there was that much Waylon Mercy influence. Obviously, Waylon Mercy's based on the Robert De Niro character, and I knew that I know about Cape Fear, obviously, but also I didn't even know that it was a direct influence. I thought it was just kind of a coincidence they were both kind of riffing that character, with the Cajun flair. But about the Fiend, let me get back to the Fiend. They skipped that stuff, and I'm glad they did, because those are two horrible times. Bad Vince McMahon creative is what that was, and so because of that, Bray Wyatt, they skipped it. They basically went from that to WrestleMania. So they went from August 2019, the match with Finn Balor, skipped all the way to WrestleMania, which was smart. The match with Cena, and how it was not at Raymond James Stadium. It was in the Performance Center, and it was all, recorded and all that. They talked about it. They showed some behind-the-scenes stuff there, too, of Cena working with him. That was cool stuff. That was very much appreciated. They discussed a lot of Bray's ideas for stuff beyond wrestling. A lot of his ideas for stuff beyond wrestling. And he wanted to do movies. It wasn't like he didn't want to write movies. I remember talking to somebody close to him a couple years ago. I think it was maybe it was 2 years ago. And I didn't talk to him directly about this, but he talked about how he had these ideas for like pilots to pitch to Hollywood. Like he wanted to do movies. And they talked a lot about sort of, where he was kind of like, they talked about his termination from the company. They talked about how depressed he was when Brody died. All this happened in 2020. They discussed John Huber's passing respectfully. They talked about then, of course, he started to become a painter, and they went into his little shed. Well, it's not really a shed. It's like his painting room. He has a room in the house where he would work, like his office, and he had a bunch of paintings he had done during his time off from wrestling. And then, of course, he started developing new ideas. He started to, in 2022 is when he started his comeback. Of course, that would happen in Philly, actually, in Philadelphia, at Extreme Rules. And they did reveal here for the first time publicly that Uncle Howdy was indeed Taylor Rotunda / Bo Dallas. Like, we all kind of suspected it. It had gotten out, but now it's like public that Bo Dallas was definitely underneath the hood, and they had a lot more ideas. Now, what I found interesting, speaking of which, is that this documentary does have a post-credit scene that almost hints or implies that Uncle Howdy will still be a character on WWE TV. I don't know if that's just a tribute to Bray Wyatt. I don't know if that's just something that they want to do or that Bo wants to do. I don't know. Or maybe it's just something that's like for the documentary as an Easter egg. But it felt like maybe they were in the direction that it felt, because you see like the shadow of Uncle Howdy. It felt like maybe they were going in that direction. I don't know though. But the last 20 minutes of this thing were hard. They talk about him getting COVID before WrestleMania last year. They didn't mention that Bobby Lashley was supposed to be his opponent, but they did mention that he took time off. And then, of course, they go into the details of his passing, his heart problems, and how one thing, they go like almost, week by week, of sort of like what happened with him, how he was admitted to the hospital. He thought he would have to get a pacemaker. And then they talk about his passing. And then after that, everyone's crying. Braun Strowman, like, it's, of course, super sad, man. It's very hard to not shed a tear for this thing. And, they show his funeral. They have footage of his funeral where it's funny, you see Goldust there, who was and still is signed to AEW. But when it comes to wrestling funerals, man, contracts don't mean anything, dude. When Owen Hart died in 1999, Hulk Hogan went to that funeral, who was in WCW. Like, it doesn't matter, man. Funerals, when somebody passes away, it's bigger than the business. So that was a very interesting thing that they showed, and I wasn't expecting them to actually show the funeral. Like, that was interesting. That was unexpected. And really the story of the documentary was just how creative he was. And then at the end, man, as if they haven't reached into your heart and pulled it out, they show his kids, like, oh, Undertaker's doing the voiceover, he's the narrator, and they're like, he's still alive. And they show his 4 kids, and they're like, in them. And it's just damn, man, they really hammered it home. Those kids lost their father at a very, very young age, dude. I lost my dad when I was 29. I thought that was young. These kids lost it even younger, and I just feel so bad for the family. They interviewed JoJo and his ex-wife. Didn't go into any of the quote-unquote rumors and allegations of that. They just talked about how they drifted apart, which happens. I mean, your husband's on the road, you're at home. It happens a lot. It's just unfortunate, but really powerful piece. Very well done by WWE. Very respectable and respectful to the family. And if you were a fan of Bray Wyatt, I do recommend watching it. It's 2 hours, and it tells his life story very well, and it's very emotional. So definitely do that. Anyways, y'all, take care. I will see you guys tomorrow. We have a lot to talk about tomorrow. I'm going to give my thoughts on Raw, plus this CM Punk pipe bomb on Ariel Helwani show. I can't wait.